which we included 4 crops that, at least from a European perspective, are of some importance. That is wheat, corn or maize, oilseeds, and then we lumped the other grains such barley, rye, triticale, and so on together as a 4th crop. We looked at 5 model regions, but our area of emphasis obviously was the European Union. And we tried to compare the situation in 2003, 2005 to what we expect to be the reality in 2013-15. We looked at acreages in the 5 model regions, in the changes in yields. On the demand side, we looked at population growth and food consumption growth as a consequence of per capita income growth, and we also included bioenergy. And the result was, for the European Union, the change in demand by the 4 crops that we looked at, and by the different uses of these crops as food, feed, and energy. And the same we did for the demand side, and then we analyzed the market prices and the quantities traded. And this is the result with regard to the change in European Union demand with regard to these 4 crops. And in the 10-year period that we looked at, we expect, as you can see, wheat demand to go up by 20%, corn by 13%, oilseeds by 50%, and other grains by a little more than 10%. However, these percentage changes need to be put into perspective. Wheat is such an important crop, and a 20% increase in the demand for wheat means 25 million tons, and that is more than the 18 million tons in oilseeds, which are equivalent to a 51% increase. And when you look at these, at the next slide, in which we decomposed the demand change into the demand change for food, for feed, and bioenergy, you immediately notice that bioenergy is driving the demand in the European Union. So there is not much of food demand growth, there is not much of feed demand growth. What's fueling the demand growth in the European Union is the expected demand for bioenergy. And don't get confused by these enormous percentages. This has something to do with the fact that in our base period 2003 to 5, there was hardly any wheat and hardly any corn being grown for bioenergy. That's why you get these enormous percentages. So it's more illustrative to look at these absolute numbers. So on a, let me go back. So on a global scale, it is the demand for food and for feed that is fueling the rapid growth in demand for agricultural commodities and food. But in the European Union, as in other developing countries, in other industrialized countries, it is not the food demand and feed demand that's growing by much anymore. It is bioenergy. Okay, now let's look at the supply side. And by just looking at the percentages here, you notice that the growth in supply that we expect to materialize in the European Union will be smaller than the growth in demand, with the exception of corn. You may remember the expected increase in the demand for wheat was at 25 million tons, and the expected supply growth in wheat is 9 million tons. So with the exception of corn, European Union growth will exceed European Union growth in supply. However, we need to keep in mind that the demand growth is policy driven, and policies may change. Our assumptions are based on the present objectives in the European Union with regard to the use of bioenergy. And on the supply side, the same is true. That I've mentioned on the demand side, that the changes are driven for the most part, for the most part, by the increase in bioenergy production. So supply and demand growth in the European Union that is fueled by these by bioenergy. And when you look at the net trade position, we were really surprised to see that the European Union is reverting back to a net importer situation. Until 1978-79, the European Union was a net importer of wheat. It wasn't until then that the European Union emerged on the world market as a major and consistent exporter of wheat. But given the changes that we've just looked at, we can expect the European Union to become a net importer of wheat again. And possibly this may change the policy objectives, but we can talk about this later. In corn, the European Union used to be a minor importer, it will be a minor exporter, but in oilseeds, where the European Union already is one of the major importers in the world, this net import situation will even be more pronounced. And in other grains, we can expect the same to happen that's happening in wheat, that the European Union reverts back to a net importer situation. And now let's look at the change in world market prices. And in fact, it is true what I initially said. What we can expect in the future is a sustained but modest increase in the price of agricultural commodities. So we can't expect the prices to be skyrocketing. So on an annual basis, analyzed expect a 1.5% increase of wheat, a 3% increase of corn prices, and a 3% increase in the price of oilseeds, and 1.3% increase in the price of other grains. So expect the price of agricultural commodities to get back to more normal levels in a year or so, and then to continue, and then expect them to continue to go up at a modest rate in typical years. In the interest of time, I'll skip these and let me conclude. So from 1870 to 2000, agriculture in the European Union and in other countries was on an economic decline. That was the time of the agricultural treadmill, the time in which farmers the world around became ever more productive. Figuratively speaking, they were running ever faster, but economically they didn't get anywhere because the income effect of the productivity and production growth time and again was eroded by declining prices. So this trend has been broken since the turn of the millennium. Agricultural prices and the prices of food have begun to increase. That's positive, that's good news for farmers all over the world. And this can be expected to continue for the next few decades. However, as we discussed, increasing food prices aggravate both global malnutrition and deforestation, and thus global warming. And as the agricultural acreage that is available on a global scale, this productivity growth of land being farmed, that is the key in the fight against both malnutrition and global warming. And of course, productivity growth doesn't fall from heaven like manna. It is the result of human action. It's the result of more intensive use of the land that is already being farmed. It's the result of more and better inputs. It's the result of agricultural teaching and extension education. Of course, also of an appropriate economic and political environment. And what comes to mind is, to me, is the regulatory framework that governs the use of GMOs in the European Union. Thank you for your attention.